Good morning and welcome back after that short break. I actually am wearing multiple hats here and I thought I'll just step back from the presentation and you've been introduced to Professor Mantha and Mr. R.L. Singh who came in and addressed you. But we also have Ms. Radha Chauhan, who is the Joint Secretary for the Ministry of Human Resource Development. She was briefly up here with Neil, signing the MOU with the CBSE and the Central Institute. We also have Mr. R.D. Sahai, who is the Joint Secretary Technical Education from the Ministry of Human Resource Development. We have Dr. Renu Batra, who is the Joint Secretary to the University Grants Commission, but she also is the key person behind the joint working group there. And we have Dr. Renu Bapna from the All India Council of Technical Education. So we have a very strong public-private partnership in this delegation. And you heard about that booklet. So in the booklet, you'll find Leena De Chakravarti, who's at the back, who is actually coordinating the team. And you have Neeta Pradhan Das, who will also from the CII side is actually working in getting this team into action. So if you see the cover of the booklet, you see 3 or 4 organizations. One organization is actually not there, but Mr. De Silva, who is the president of the Indian Earth Moving and Construction Equipment Association, is also here with us, other than the CII team and representatives from FICCI and the Bengal Chamber. The Bengal Chamber person is wearing 2 hats. He also is the president of the National HRD Network, which is the network of all the HRD managers in India. So you have a huge group here. Now, given that role, I'll actually now move into the second role as the bread and butter role, which I actually work on a day-to-day basis on talking about the Indian skills development model and public-private partnerships. The presentation is in 3 parts. I'm going to be very brief about the overview of the government initiatives that you've seen, but the NSDC model, and then talk about a few areas of collaboration. You saw this slide in Param's presentation, but India will have a young population, and we need to get them actively and economically involved in the country's prosperity. Otherwise, the demographic dividend could not be leveraged. You've actually seen different parts of this in Professor Mantha, Mr. Singh, and Param's presentations. The challenge is we have inadequate skilled manpower. The people who are coming out of the system are not adequately skilled, and very low enrollments for WET, and even industry doesn't send their people for training. The second issue is that, you heard in the morning that the sector skill councils is at a very nascent stage. We don't have a formalized labor market information system. So one of the challenges that we looked at, if you have to skill 500 million people, are there 500 million jobs? So we did a survey among 22 sectors. Last year, 2 years ago, on the 7th of July, 2010, same podium, same place, I made a presentation of 21 sectors. It was 244 million. Since then, we have added another sector, which is the infrastructure sector. That means, and that sector requires about 103 million people over the next 10 years. So we've got to 347, and I'm sure when you do more sectors as we go forward, it may be possible that we do have an opportunity for over 500 million people to be absorbed in the economy. That is, provided the economy grows at the rate that it is growing. You've seen Mr. Singh talk about the national skills policy. 4 objectives, really: coordination, inclusivity. We're moving from supply side to a demand-led, dynamic-based system, and we want to offer choice, competition, and also have the whole system accountable going forward. So therefore, that means that there's a new approach to addressing this gap. You've heard many speakers talk about the need for social appreciation of skills as a livelihood asset, linking education or training to employability. And of course, there's no one solution. Like in Australia, similarly in India, every region, every trade, every company demands innovation and a new innovative approach. So the country as a whole is undertaking fundamental reforms. We have a Right to Education Act actually in place. We're looking at improving outcomes and quality in the education system, increasing retention. Professor Mantha talked about the high dropout rates, and he also talked about the integration, seamless integration into the vocational training space. You heard him and Mr. Singh talk about the significantly enhancement of the government-driven vocational training efforts. And you've also seen in their two presentations the way that the government is trying to involve the private sector to better utilize government facilities, better utilize government programs and infrastructure. The fourth leg of that chair, or the stool really, is fostering private sector and industry participation in skill development. And this is the role of NSDC, which I will talk about in a minute. You heard about the 500 million. The 500 million is the national target. The government initiatives is 350 million, and the NSDC is 150 million. But the Ministry of Labor, which is represented by Mr. Singh, the Ministry of Human Resource Development, which is also here, and the NSDC actually cumulatively account for over 350 million of these numbers. So, it's a huge representation that there's here. The country is also thinking about PPP models, 9 reasons that I want to share with you. Basically, they're looking at, which you heard Param talk about in the morning, competencies that are as per industry requirements. Probably industry requirements not equal to qualification, but to meet the aspirations of the people, you're looking at the qualification framework. Also looking at private sector to deliver training, monitoring, and evaluation, participate in examination and certification, affiliation and accreditation, train the trainers, it's been mentioned many times this morning, and also look at skill demand analysis and curriculum development so that the needs of the employers and industries are met. 2 key roles, sharing of workplace experience. You've heard the apprenticeship, on-the-job training, workplace experience, machinery and equipment, and also support in terms of physical, financial, and human resources. There are different PPP models in India, at least 4, if not more. The first one is where the government is completely funding, and you have the adoption of the ITIs. You have the skill development centers, which provide custom training as per industry requirements, and later on absorb the passed out students. You have a new build, operate, transfer model, which is coming up with the 1,500 ITIs that Mr. Singh talked about. You also have central and state ministry programs, which are prescribed delivery parameters and funding opportunities, and private sector is expected to deliver as per the norms set out. Most of these have an outcome-based requirement of at least 70% of the people that you train being employed. And employed here means also becoming an entrepreneur. The NSDC model is really to promote private sector leadership in skill development, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You'll see in a variation of this slide in Mr. R.L. Singh's presentation, there are many ministries that are actually engaged in this area. I think, why should you be interested in India? Is there a business case? Business people and those who are looking for returns, there are really 6 key reasons why you need to be there. It is a $20 billion annual industry. That's the size of the wet market. It's been done by independent financial analysts. It's very unorganized. The early movers will have the early advantage. We need brands of credible brands, and we've heard a lot about the credibility of Australian wet system. You have many examples that you can look at in India. It's a fairly flexible in terms of regulation, and both government and private equity money is chasing this sector. NSDC is also actually supporting the financing of setting up of scalable, sustainable systems. and I will just talk about that. There are three elements of the NSDC philosophy. When you're talking about hundreds of millions, right? So you've got to actually create a vision of large, scalable, quality vocational training institutions. That's the first role that we have. The second is that people are unwilling to invest their own money and risk investment for the fear of failure. So how do you provide patient capital, and how do we actually enable them to meet the the financial bridge deficit? It is not viability gap funding in the infrastructure sense. It is actually how do you get private sector to actually invest. And the third, what we realized very early on, is that just setting up the training institution and having the jobs doesn't necessarily mean that you'll fill the classroom. So you need to create an enabling ecosystem, and I'll talk about that as we go forward. We firmly believe that this requires collaboration, both internal, external, and it has to be a demand-led strategy. It's not a question of getting people into a classroom and getting them out of the door. We've got to make sure that the training meets the demand and aspirations of the individual and meets the requirements and expectations of industry. We have to really look at thinking, scale, and sustainability. So one of the things that we promote is that institutes should look at skilling at least 100,000 people over 10 years. Are there institutes in Australia that do this? Yes, and I've been to quite a few. 2, is it possible to replicate models that are successful in Australia, perhaps not at that scale, but successful in India at scale? Is it possible? Yes, because the Australian system is all about repeatability and sustainability. And we really look at driving vocational training business models by providing patient funding. So we only require 100,000 people over 10 years, 70% of them to get employed. So anybody with or without an education qualification, with or without a job, who gets skilled and gets a certificate that is recognized by industry, and if the person does not have a job, he either gets a job or becomes an entrepreneur or actually joins a higher education course, is a candidate. Or if he or she has a job through this program, gets back to the job and gets an increment or gets a promotion or is entitled to do a different job, is also a candidate. So our candidate definition is very, very simple, and it's a very transparent way how we can account for it. We fund up to 75% of the project cost. Debt is at subsidized rates. It's at 6%. For some people in the world, 6% is a high rate, but if you look at the Indian situation, it's fairly soft rate. But with a 3-year moratorium or 4-year moratorium on repayment and a 10-year repayment cycle, it actually makes sense to actually partner in SDC if you're looking at setting up scalable, sustainable businesses in India. We have a robust process, a well-defined process. We hope to keep our turnaround time to less than 3 months. Is it working? Has it worked? What's the story on the ground? So this slide has 49 partners, out of which training partners. We have startups. We have large established corporates who are not in the training business. We had large established corporates who were in the training business, K-12 or university, but not in the vet space. We had training providers who were small and scaling up. Many of them are in this room. They're here spending their own money and time looking for partnerships to actually build their businesses back in India. Unfortunately, this chart is out of date for the simple reason that on the 6th we had another board meeting. We have added 3 more skill training institutions and 2 more sector skill councils. And that's the fun of working in NSDC, because we have a board meeting every 6 weeks, and every 6 weeks, hopefully, this chart gets updated. Soon, we'll have to break this up into 2 different slides. Like I mentioned to you, I was here on the 7th of July, 2010. At that point of time, we had 3 training partners, 0 sector skill councils. We had committed $8.2 million, covered 6 sectors. As of last year, we had 25 training partners who had actually trained, the 3 training partners had trained 20,000 people. We had committed funds of 120 million, and we had 15 sectors covered. Today, as I stand before you, we actually have 65 partners approved with 52 training partners, 13 sector skill councils, and over the last year, we have trained 212,000 people. It's good, but not good enough. Because remember, our target is 150 million. So if you divide them, it's 0.00 some percent, right? So we've got a long, long way to go. But I just wanted to say, that this is the progress that we've made. We are also taking other initiatives. The sector skill councils I'll talk about in a minute. One of the things that we did was we found that these 23 sector skill gaps that we did were very well received. And we said, can we do the next level? Can we do a state level? So we'd undertaken 14 this year, and over the course of this year, we'd have mapped all the states. And we also plan to redo the sector skill gap studies going forward. We did conduct a study on train the trainers and labor market information. Financing vocational training, and this is a very significant difference between developed countries and developing countries. It makes sense for developed countries to actually finance and subsidize the training of people so that they're employed, because the financing of training is less than the cost of Social Security if you were to bear the cost of Social Security going forward. Unfortunately, that's not the case in India. We need to have sustainable models going forward because we don't have that much money to subsidize the people for skill development. So we are bringing up a self-financing loan system which has been further enhanced with the Prime Minister's council and the advisor to the Prime Minister, Mr. Ramodurai, and incidentally, Mr. Jayant Krishna, who works with Mr. Ramodurai, is leading the CII delegation. We are also coordinating the whole World Skills competition as a means to show and demonstrate the aspirational value of skills. We need more entrepreneurs and school kids and college kids to think about education and skill development. So we're running business plan competitions. The board has finally approved last week a full-fledged media campaign to actually address the aspirational needs of students and to see if you can use the media. And Geraldine, if you think that you can contribute, you'll be most welcome. That's another area of Australia-India partnership which is not in the slide. And we're also looking at working with international organizations, and you see the AISC as part of the group there. An area talked about was the sector skill councils. In fact, we know that the sector skill councils took years to develop in countries such as UK, Australia, and other countries. But we don't have the luxury of time. What we do have is the luxury of drawing upon the experiences of all those people who have tried various models and succeeded or found what does not work, to learn from them and replicate this model in India. Again, unfortunately, the bottom line has changed as we've approved 13 sector skill councils. And to give you an idea, the 11 that have been approved are here. The ones that move from the due diligence into approved are food processing and telecom, both interesting areas for Australia. This slide is really the 20 priority sectors, the ones with large workforce, and we are experimenting with the informal sector. We are receiving support from Australia, and Janet Allen is here, and she's made trips to India. We also had Bob Payton, who had come for the INSO meeting, which we hosted on the 7th and 8th of May in New Delhi. But really, we are looking at partnerships to grow on this, and I think these are areas where you could invest going forward. So let me end by saying the areas of collaboration and key recommendations. I was told by Philip Bullock that we only remember 3 things: right? So the 3 ideas, okay? Please look at setting up skill development programs in India. From my perspective or our perspective, in partnership with NSDC, from your perspective, it could be anybody. We need industry-based curriculum development and training packages. A lot of them exist here. And training of trainers, right? Minister Evans was not happy with the 4 MOUs. I think he wants 40, and at least some of them by end of this day. So it's a challenge that we all have to do. Just to help you, I've just listed down some sectors which, in a brainstorming discussion, it was felt that Australia has the capability and ability to partner with India. Apologies to any sector which is not there, but it's always interesting to do a new sector. The one thing we need to remember is, if you go back to that slide with the logos and the 52 odd partners that we have approved, what is very interesting is they might be in the same sector, but the business model, the approach is totally different. So there's not a one-size-fits-all. It's all innovation going forward, and the NSDC does not actually dictate what you do. It just supports and tries to assist in enabling what you do. I don't want to leave the sector skill councils out. 5 special areas which all actually lead to the bottom line, which is development of the qualification framework. We need this. We look forward to actually working with you to enable this transition to happen. I was trying to see how do I sign off and how do I end. And it is very interesting that is there an acceptance of India as a destination? Is there acceptance of India as a partner? And I could just, it is just providence that I read in the paper. And if you see that this is the Australian, this is today's newspaper. Many of you might have views about this newspaper, but that's not the story. But the interesting thing is, it says, Exotic India and Mountain Kingdom by private jet, okay? So Exotic India by private skill training providers is what the message I want to leave with you. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dilip. I'm sure loads of people will take that up because they'll all have the opportunity to do that. A very interesting overview, Dilip, particularly that various observations, but that one I just highlighted, that the difference between the thinking and the logic in developing and developed countries about financing skills developments. And in fact, earlier people had been saying to me, the trouble is here, we have a low volume, high cost model, and you have a high volume, low cost model. And this is exactly the trick that we're trying to name and invite people to address precisely that dilemma. So that's what I like about the people organising this conference. They're extremely aspirational, but they know there are some genuine things to be worked out.